We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That's a pretty profound statement, and it would seem to have some religious content. We're talking about a Creator and being endowed with rights that cannot be taken away by any government. Um, Many people who argue that America is a Christian nation point to the statement in the Declaration of Independence as being incredibly important and central to American government. So, interestingly, many atheists and agnostics, secularists who would argue that America is not a Christian nation, um, point out that there's no mention of God in the Constitution. That the Declaration is just kind of, as one atheist put it, giving notice to Britain, we're done here. Um, that's arguably the case, but many would argue that that's not at all the case. Um, the Constitution is built on, according to many, the idea that um, governments are institutions to guard rights that are given by God. So this is the argument, or part of it. I would argue personally that it's rather silly to assume that the vast majority of the founders didn't believe in some form of God and have some sense that God grants rights. I would argue historically that most of the founders were more interested in the government not dictating how one could or should worship, but there really wasn't an aversion to the idea of God in some vague sense governing the universe and supplying us with kind of built into the universe ideas of what is just and good, and that those ideas of justice and goodness aren't dependent upon elections or current governments or popular opinion, but they're part of the construct of the universe based on the idea that there is a God of order and justice. That's not necessarily Christian, or certainly not fully Christian in a theological sense. And certainly there were founders who didn't really concern themselves much with that. There may have even been an atheist or a strongly agnostic founder or two. Some of the founders were genuinely Christians. Some were more deistic in their views. So that's just some things to think about as you read the articles. My approach tends to be looking for balance. I think it's silly to assume that none of the founders' thinking was driven by certain Christian and Americanized Christian ideals. These are not atheistic documents. They may be secular documents, though that requires some definition of what precisely we mean by secular. So these are the things we want to consider in the discussion board. I don't want to rattle on and on with my opinion. I just wanted to be upfront that I think I tend to hold a moderate view in that you can't dismiss from the founders and the founding documents certain core ideas about God, about justice being rooted in creation by God who is just and orderly. At the same time, I don't think you can make an argument that the founders were trying to establish, theologically speaking, some clearly and precisely delineated Christian nation. In fact, the Second Amendment would preclude that, right? No establishment of religion. This is because of the historical context the founders, or at least the founders' ancestors, came out of, which is state governments would establish a church, and if you weren't part of that state church, then you were at odds with the state itself. That was the issue that the founders were trying to address in their approach to religion and government. They weren't, the idea of trying to establish some profoundly secular government really is kind of foreign to their historical context, I would argue. So there it is. I'm rather moderate. I'll be entering into the discussion board. Please don't feel obligated to just state my opinion. That would be really boring. If you agree with me, then certainly, by all means, agree. But do the reading and figure out, what is significant, where do you agree most, what's most important, what are the strongest arguments, how would you deal with the strongest arguments against this position. If you disagree with me, by all means, please do. We'll enjoy the debate and discussion. There again, support your positions from the various articles and the things that they reference. Looking forward to it. This week is kind of the most informal week because if I were in a classroom, I would be starting out the semester by trying to engage more discussion and conversation and debate in the first couple of classes before we jumped into kind of the text and all that. And this is the only way I know how to do that in an online setting really effectively, is to kind of state my position, give you these readings, and then ask you to read them and discuss in a discussion board context. So please take the discussion board assignment seriously. Get engaged with it. Let's try to keep it to one thread so that we don't have to jump between 5 different discussion board pages, but just one thread of an ongoing discussion. So whoever's first gets to start, gets to take the lead position. If you're the first one to post in response to one of the articles, you'll have a little bit of control into which direction the discussion goes, purposely leaving that a little open-ended. So welcome to the course. Looking forward to this semester.